wrestler, a man with an amazing physique and the world at his feet, or in this case, the world's feet on him, if you know what I'm saying. Um, he he had it all, but in the end, it was too much too soon. Tony Atlas. Before we start talking about this episode, how did you find it, Jose?
This was the dark side of the ring episode for damn sure. Like I knew about like the car accident, and I knew about him ending up homeless, and I knew about the drug, sex, and rock and roll lifestyle that he had. So if you were a fan of the '70s and '80s, you definitely knew what was going on with Tony Atlas, and you know for sure that this was a dark side episode. It was a good episode.
Guys?
Yeah, I'd say there it was a really good dark side episode. Delving into the racial aspects and delving into his his financial misfortune and his drug use, which was good to see. And to be honest, they covered everything about Tony. It's good to see him in good health and that he's in good spirits despite that all that he's gone through. So that's always good to see. Whenever we see this, sometimes the person's not wrong with us, but the fact that 2 years and he seems to be fairly robust health is always a good sign.
Yeah, I think because he had the second chance at life, he's happy with what he's got. Um, yeah, once again, for me, I like this episode a lot. There was still, and I'm not having an issue with this episode at all when I mention this, but there's a moment in this episode where you think, okay, there's another element we can pull from this episode. If we got an editor together, you can make a Vince McMahon dark side of the episode, or there's a Vince McMahon element in this episode too that they could use to make that overall Vince McMahon series. Anyways, let's start by talking about this episode. So we start off with Mark Henry watching a young Tony Atlas. You can get the feeling that Mark Henry's idol to a degree was Tony Atlas, and he's fighting the heel Hulk Hogan, the incredible Hulk Hogan back then. Um, and this was before Hulkamania. And we see him do a press slam on Hogan. Hogan's a big guy, he's no Andre the Giant, obviously, but he's like a 6'6", sort of 300-pound plus guy. So to press slam him was no mean feat. And this was also in Madison Square Garden, and it kind of showed the strength of Tony Atlas. And by the way, anytime you guys want to intervene, let me know. But Atlas was born in Virginia. He was very much influenced by his mother, who beat the shit out of someone who once slapped her ass, which was a nice and funny moment. Atlas was always fighting, though, himself. He got into scraps in school and got intimidated by his own father, who told him that if he loses a beating outside of school, he'll get even worse when he comes home.
Yeah, this is how it was back in the '70s. It used to be a thing of, you had to learn how to fight. When you were a kid, you had to learn how to fight. You had to learn how to scrap. Back in like the '50s and '60s and '70s and shit. And with Tony, he came from that old school of like, all right, you got to be a man.
Hard knocks.
Put up your dukes. Yeah, you got to know how to fight.
I apologize. I just realized my microphone's fucking miles away.
Yeah.
Do I sound quite?
You still sound pretty good though.
You still sound fine. Yeah, I was just gonna say, it was interesting hearing his background. Like, obviously, like he looked up to his parents. Like they gave him a fairly grounded thing, but they still were prisoners of their time of rough and tumble. Like I think this might have been post segregation South, so like there's still remnants of that still about, and like
yeah,
and like. I mean, I don't know when Tony went to school they would have desegregated the schools yet, or like that was just. Or that was just coming out with Tony there, and you had to fight because of that. I don't know.
He was probably around that time, similar time for sure. Atlas was once pushed from behind when walking with a girl from school. He fell over and hurt his head, and said that was a turning point in his life. I mean, that kind of like, in a way, he believed affected his learning, his abilities, and stuff like that. He was told to pray by his grandmother, so he did, and he wanted to be strong like Samson, built like Hercules, and have lots of money. And God ended up answering his prayers.
Two out of the three ain't bad though. When you look at Tony Atlas's case,
yeah, I guess he wasn't as strong as Samson, but he was definitely built like Hercules. Mm. Then we quickly get into this weird moment, like Tony explained his shoe fetish. he liked to buy tennis shoes for women, and they would walk on his face. He would pay $50 for women to do those things. He said his shoe fetish would keep him calm, and it was more of a dominatrix thing. So I need to change headphones.
Yep.
What do
But
you think of that, Jose?
that I mean, we all got our weird fetishes in life and weird quinks. I mean, weird kinks, and we all have OCD to an extent. You know, I mean, as long as you're not hurting anybody or hurting yourself, you can do what you want to do. You know, that's kind of what I say. As weird as it is, it's like, you know, I can't judge them because we all got our weird quirks in life that we do.
By the way, I love the fact that Ricky DeVrago Steamboat was there going, "Hey, we've all got like stuff we're into." I'm just like, go on, Ricky. It's like, and yeah, it's like you see him going into a foot store and he's there going, "Well, these trainers are for the women nights and stuff." I mean, I'm just like, oh okay.
Yeah, he was like he really. Yeah, it's weird. Like I have my own kinks. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not going to tell you guys about them, but that was a weird one for me because it's not like the woman's feet on him. It's the actual shoes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's weird. All right, fair enough. Anyway, at 19, Atlas pressed 350 pounds and he was getting recognized as a bodybuilder. David Crockett from the Crockett Wrestling family saw him and put him through his paces to turn him into a wrestler. They then paid him. They paid him $150 a week to train him.
Yeah. And Tony, like, he was like, "All right, man, we got to put you in the ring. You got to learn how to work." And he's like, "I don't want to work. I want to wrestle." And it's like, Tony couldn't figure that out. Like, it's like, dude, like, you know, we've all had that, like, you know, this is like wrestling is fake moment. And for Tony, he was all heartbroken when he found out. It's like, hey, man, this shit ain't really real, you know. It's all an act, and he was heartbroken to find that out. But, you know, we all have been there at one point or another in our lives.
Because because the one thing I couldn't get is, was Tony a wrestling fan growing up? Because the fact is that like he never really talks about it, and the fact is that you can.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Yeah, because he would have talked about it when he would have talked about it. He would have said, "Oh, you know, I grew up watching, you know, Gorgeous George and Luthez and guys like that, or whatever, you know, whoever was around during that time." But he never mentioned any of his peers, I think, other than like Wildfire or Tommy Rich.
Yeah, he seemed to me that he got into just bulking up and being strong because he was doing bodybuilding before he got into wrestling, and it is quite common to see bodybuilders turn into wrestlers. But I'll get to that in a second. But they were paying him $150 a week, and now he was in a sport where people would beat on him, and and he would lose to them. But in real life, he knows he would never lose to those people, which was kind of funny.
Yep.
Now, Mark Henry did have Atlas as the manager, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. But going on to his physique, he was perfect. I mean, you saw it; he looked like he was chiseled, and he competed in bodybuilding tournaments with the likes of Ricky Steamboat, which I didn't know, who was also a bodybuilder. I mean, it makes sense; he had a great physique, but his wrestling physique never really looked like a bodybuilder's physique, you know.
You would never guess that Ricky Steamboat was going to be a bodybuilder. Like, you would never be able to figure that out. When you look at him,
people did say that he
skinny.
was deceptively strong.
Yeah,
people work with. And seriously, it doesn't really matter because I mean, like Tony Up was Mr. USA, and that was like, I mean, the fact that he has the flaming statue and stuff like that, it's like he's still Mr. USA. It's just like, okay.
Well, because he kept winning, he won bodybuilding competitions, and he won the title of Mr. USA as a bodybuilder, which became his moniker when he started wrestling.
One thing I'm surprised about, I don't think they ever touched on this. I don't know if they ever said like he did it clean or not, because you know that a lot of bodybuilders have that reputation of like, oh, I did drugs or I did it clean. You know, they never covered that with Tony.
Well,
like whether he did it clean or not.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think if there was a reason to cover it and mention it, then I think it would have definitely been brought up.
Yeah.
You know, I think somebody like him was just happy. I mean, he was kind of limited where he could work out, if you know what I mean. So I think coming across those things, he came across those things more in wrestling than he did probably as a bodybuilder, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
I don't know what you mean. But
Yeah,
I mean,
so
as I said, like Al Snow's got a great story about Tony Atlas, which if you've not watched it, is on YouTube.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so Jerry Briscoe, he's seen many bodybuilders in the wrestling industry, but just because you are a bodybuilder doesn't mean necessarily you're going to be a great wrestler, which is perfectly wise thing to say, you know.
Yes.
But there are exceptions to the rules, and Tony Atlas was definitely one of them. And he got involved in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and they made him a champion pretty quickly.
Yeah, they made him the TV champion, and then I know we're kind of fast forwarding a bit, but the thing is, when you're the champion, the world champion picked up the tab, and as we're going to get into with the financial side of Tony Atlas a little later on, fame comes with a price. That's pretty much all that needs to be said about that.
Yep. Well, he soon tagged with Tommy Rich, and it was very early, but they were like a mixed race tag team.
Yeah, he
Which was
still looks good too, Tommy Rich.
yeah.
Yeah,
Seems like a good guy, by the way. It seems like a
Yeah.
good guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I mean, like the thing is that like he talks about the fact that in the locker room people use racial epithets a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this was what the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, and it's just like it was still that wide use that would be okay. And it's just like, if they're going more getting paid, it's like, what? It's
Yeah, I'm
like,
gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to
okay.
that. You guys got to stick to what I'm bringing
Yeah.
up at the moment. Yeah. Anyway, he was with Tommy Rich, and they were a mixed race tag team, and this was way back in the 70s, which was kind of a unique thing. Um, they were black and white, and they fight all night. It was unusual. It was unusual, but trailblazing for sure. Back then, with racism being so rampant, uh, there was only really one black guy in each territory. The N word was thrown around a lot, as Bossman says, but Atlas accepted it because he was making money. Fair enough.
Yep.
Yeah, he was the top guy as well. It's funny. They were racist as fuck, but he was also the top guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so back then, and you got to remember, this was like the late 70s, and this was a hell of a lot of money. He was making $100,000 a year.
Yeah, back then, 100,000 could carry you if you knew how to invest it and save it the right way. And like Tony said
Yeah,
in the episode, it's not what you make, it's what you save. And I think Tony learned that lesson too late in life, unfortunately.
Yeah, go on, guys.
I was gonna say, yeah, like I think inflation, I think he'd be the equivalent of like I think it'd be like 10 million now in today's money.
Yeah,
Maybe more of $1 million, but I would say this. If you're making £100,000 or dollars a year now, you'd be pretty satisfied with that. Yeah, and that's now. You could live on that now. So to make it in the 70s, my God, like he was killing it.
he could have got a house. He could have got a house his first year because the housing market back then, it cost like $75,000 minimum to get a house back then, and he still would have had change left over depending on where he was living.
Yeah, for sure. So back then he was making 100K a year, but he's also spending like crazy. He had two ways to live like a king or be rich, and Tony chose to live like a king.
Woo!
He had lots of hanger-ons and fake friends who took advantage of his wealth. He was living a high life, banging 3 chicks at a time, and doing a lot of drugs too. And the drugs he was doing, by the way, these were not performance enhancing. These were recreational. So yeah, he was doing a lot of that. And this is no surprising because let's be honest, nearly every episode of Dark Side of the Ring, that moment comes along where drugs plays a significant part in all these wrestlers' lives. Not every wrestler we come across.
A strong majority of them, though.
Yeah.
But
go
ahead.
Go
But with Tony, he picked up the Ric Flair syndrome. He was like, I got money, bitches. I got money. I got bitches. I got drugs. I can do what I want to do. And, Tony had that king shit attitude. And that king shit attitude is the worst attitude you can have in wrestling. When you think you're hot shit, you may be hot shit, but the promoter's always looking for that next guy. And this is advice to future wrestlers out there. never think that you're going to be the promoter's guy forever, because that's not the case.
No,
Somebody's
would-
always going to
yeah.
come along and replace you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing is that like you're always replaceable, because the thing is that
Mhm.
if they put it on one guy, they're doing a bad job, because like if you leave, the territory's dead. So like
Yeah.
you're always going to be basically. But
Yeah.
we need to talk. We need to talk about the next thing. But you go ahead.
Yeah. Before I go on there, on that, like you in this industry, we did earlier on in the episode see a picture of Atlas with Mike Tyson, and they're quite similar. Like you're the top guy. You're really popular. Everyone loves you. You can fuck any girl you want. Girls are coming to you to fuck them, and you three at a time. It's amazing. But you still need that one friend in your life who's going to keep you fucking grounded, or a family or something, to keep you fucking grounded, to remind you that this shit can go in an instant. You know what I mean? Especially as you get older. And
you are born with nothing, and when you die, you will have nothing. That is a true statement in life. Like at any moment, you can go back to having nothing.
You can't take your shit with you. You leave it behind.
Nope. And don't take anything for granted either, because you could lose it all in an instant like that too. It's happened to people.
Yeah.
So after another night out of debauchery, these wrestlers drove back high and drunk, and in their car. It wasn't Tony driving though; he was just a passenger. But one of their colleagues was I don't know if I think it was Tommy. I'm not sure. But their car flipped over and it crashed. And this was kind of washed over a little bit, because it was an incident in Tony's life, and he did break his neck, but he wasn't on the shelf for too long, because before you know it, he signed for the WWE, and I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, it was brushed over pretty quick, don't you think? He broke his fucking neck.
It was good to see Nick Patrick, though. He still looks like he's doing well for a guy that pretty much, I think, is retired now, because he only got released by WWE a few years ago. Still looks good.
Yeah, and when you're a referee, you can go on for a long time, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah, look how long Charles Robinson's been going.
Oh, still going. Yeah.
Yeah, well, little Nate, he keeps himself in good shape as well. Like, he works out a lot. I watch. You ever saw those Sheamus videos where he works out with the wrestlers?
Yep.
No. Oh yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. There was one episode with Charles Robinson.
Not to go on a tangent, but for the Chaotic Warrior workouts, go YouTube the one where he works out with Dominic Mysterio. It's the best episode he's ever done.
Yeah. Well, Dominic, he stays in character, doesn't he, for the whole fucking time?
Yep.
Yeah.
But okay, yeah. Well, now we're back to where he's in the hospital, like you said, for about 3-4 days. And the producers even asked Tony. They were like, "Dude, was this a wake up call?" Tony just looked.
Yeah.
Nope.
No, good point. No, it wasn't a wake up call at all.
Yep.
Because but things got better for him. Funny enough, it didn't get worse. This wasn't the downfall. He ended up joining the WWE. Like this is like the top, and he joined and this was pretty much getting to his peak now. And he joined forces with Rocky Johnson.
Yep.
And they were the first Black Tag Team Champions. But lo and behold, those two, they didn't get along. They were both kind of competitive, with the age difference as well between the two of them. Rocky being the veteran and Tony being the up and comer. And Rocky actually tried to get Tony sacked several times, and they ended up having fights, in public, like bars and stuff. They really didn't like each other.
No, I don't think they liked each other until like they were both kind of retired, quote unquote. Because I know when we covered Young Rock, I think we did season 3. I'm not sure, but it was the one where it was like the finale where Rock buys his parents a house, and you see Rocky and Tony. They must have made up, I think, years later, but I don't think they talked to each other for about 20 some odd years after they split up as a tag team.
I really hope Dwayne Johnson just helps out at Tony Atlas at some point. I really, it would be a nice gesture for him to do that. What would be pocket change for Dwayne would sort out Tony's life for forever.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were only when they were tag team. Sorry, guys, you got anything to add, by the way, before I continue?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we glossed over the fact that Dick Murdoch.
I'm going to get to that.
That's next.
Come on, Gary. I'm going to get to that, man. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's next.
No, but yeah, the Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas were. Well, I don't like using the word pioneers, but were definitely pioneers because they're the first black champions in a major company. So they were trendsetters.
Yeah.
And the thing is that they're both over, they're both great. It's a shame to hear that they didn't get on.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
think
it's a shame.
it came from that mindset of that Tony talked about, that when you went into a locker room, there'd only be like one black wrestler in there, and if he was in there, he's your enemy.
Well, I would say that's definitely more in the territories than the WWE. They had a few in the WWE. I could think.
Yeah,
I think
they had SD Jones, Junkyard
and
Dog. They
yeah,
had a few black guys in there.
Yeah, they had a few. You know, who was the guy who did the Ghetto Blaster? Bad News Brown.
Bad News Brown. Yep.
Yeah, all of and Coco Beware. You know, they had a few in WWE.
Yep.
Anyways,
I am gonna call bullshit before we go to the KKK thing. The part where they were talking about, they lost the titles 5 months in, and Tony was like, "I didn't know that we were gonna lose." I call bullshit on that because
let me quickly get to that. We'll get onto it. So they were only champ for a few months before losing their belts. Apparently, back then the world wasn't ready for black champions. You know, it seemed like more the territory wasn't ready. Hold on, just got some comments here.
Yep.
Hello, Low Down. Welcome to the stream, Winslow. Didn't Rock give Tony a car recently? I hope he did. If that was the case, that was a nice gesture. But something like a car, he would probably have to sell. You know, like give the guy some money. You know, give him something he can.
I know Rock gave Downtown Bruno a truck recently, so maybe that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, he helped out. What's his face? Downtown Bruno, aka Harvey Wimpleman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, apparently they weren't ready for black champion because racism was kind of rampant when you have an industry run by old white guys, and pretty much you're the collective of people who watch you tend to be fucking naive rednecks. That's the idea of saying, yeah, the world's not ready for a black champion, but the reality is you're so busy honing into your base, you're not willing to try and expand by having these black champion, because what you are doing, is getting more people on board, which is why the WWE now happens to go all over the fucking world, because they realize we have to expand, we have to get other people. That's why Drew McIntyre being a British champion and Damian Priest being a Latin champion, Rey Mysterio, and all of these guys and all these black wrestlers as well.
I mean, hell, even Roman Reigns, a person of color, he's had the run like the last 5 years. He was that guy for a majority of like these last 5 years. But yeah, like I do call bullshit on Tony saying like, "Oh, we didn't know we were going to lose that night." Yeah, you do, because the promoter always tells you when you're going to lose the title. They always tell you up front ahead of time.
Yeah, because you got to be able to come back.
You sound a bit shitty, Gary.
Muffled.
Oh, sorry. I think it's because I have it a bit on the outside.
Gary. It sounds really bad. Come out and come back in again. It sounds really bad. I gotta mute you.
Yep.
I gotta mute him, man.
Yeah, too much static. Yeah. I could hear a lot of static.
Yeah, it was just too. Yeah. Sorry. This is a bit. This is a bit what Gary wanted me to talk about as well. Yep. Dick Murdoch. I think. Did we have? Let's see if Gary's back now. Oh no, he's gone again.
Okay. He'll come back.
Oh, he's back again. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, you're good. Hello, Gary. Gary sounded like Star Wars. Yeah, you're better now. All right.
Yeah, I just need to. So, need just if I need to have a company, I need to disconnect them, reconnect my headphones.
Okay. Dick Murdoch, who was a renowned racist, and I think we had an episode of Dick Murdoch on this.
Did we? Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. It was a few seasons ago. They covered Dirty Dick Murdoch.
Yeah, and a renowned racist and a Klansman. There was the famous story of him trying to get Dusty Rhodes to come along, and Dusty Rhodes turned around. But this time around, they played a joke on Tony, because Tony, being a bit, unfortunately, Tony was a bit of a simpleton, unfortunately, and people took advantage of him, and they're giving out flyers, and they gave one to Tony too, saying, "Yeah, come along." And he brought his old tag mate, Tommy, which is why I think Tommy's a class act. And they drove down to the place, and Tommy sees the flyer Yeah, and goes, "This is fucking for the Ku Klux Klan." And then before they get there, he tells Tony to duck, but they don't want them to see him. And then they spin the car around and get the fuck, and they go back and they leave, And then back at wrestling, a day or two later, he's getting ribbed backstage because they didn't think Tony would go. And unfortunately for Tony, this is why he's a bit of a simpleton sometimes, because he tries to see the good in everybody, which is a nice characteristic, but this is how you get taken advantage of, which is what happened to him. And even though some people will stab him in the back a few times, he will still try to see the good in everyone. And it will take him basically to get fucked over by that person several times before he would realize that those people are assholes, even a Klansman, like fucking Dick Murdoch.
Yep.
Gary?
Yeah.
Gary? Yeah, you wanted to talk about this?
Yeah. I just want to say, like, I mean, that's an absolute bullshit thing to do, because he talks about the fact that he has dyslexia or something, which is because of that thing that happened when he was a kid with the head incident, which is possibly true. But I'm thinking is that you'd still see the flaming, like, white circle flaming cross, which is a known KKK symbol, even if you don't read words.
No, I genuinely I believe him, because Tommy was with him when it happened. They mention it,
Yeah.
Like he's dyslexic, and unfortunately, even back then, dyslexia is, I wouldn't say like a common phenomenon. I mean, people have known it's been around forever, but I think only people have really kind of realized it maybe since the 80s and 90s. They've really taken it seriously. Back in the early 80s, 70s, they wouldn't know shit. They'll just think he's a fucking idiot.
Yeah, it wasn't commonplace back then in the 70s and 80s. Like, it was like, oh, okay, you're dyslexic. All right, well, we'll figure it out.
You can't read, the words don't make sense to you. You're dumb, boy. You know what I mean?
I thought it was pretty sad that Tony would cope with drugs and alcohol to deal with all that shit. Because, like, when the guys would rib him, that's what he would turn to. He would turn to drugs and alcohol to try to cope with people ribbing him.
Well, years of pain and racism made Tony turn to drugs, and his attitude did change. Because he was a star, and so he tried to act like one, and he would try to intimidate people backstage, thinking that he was a star. And unfortunately, this is when things truly went downhill for him. Because for a start, he brought this is like just crazy. Like, he brought in a Colt 47, and he showed you the size of this fucking gun. I mean, the length of that barrel was a joke. And you just start shooting it in the ceiling, And then he had a chance to actually make history, genuinely make history. And he walked out of being a champion so he could get one of his kinks done of a girl walking over his face with tennis shoes. He became unreliable, and was
that's
released
the biggest. Sorry.
And released by and Vince then released him to make an example out of him. Go on.
I was going to say, that's the biggest no-no in wrestling, is no showing. I mean, if you tell the promoter weeks in advance that you can't make it, they can book around it. But just not showing up when you've been booked and not saying anything to promote is a way to get yourself not booked anywhere very quickly.
I don't know if I see Tony being that black world champion, if I'm honest with you, because as good as Tony was, I don't think they were going to put the belt on him at that time. But no showing, yeah, that's the one thing you never do in pro wrestling. That's the worst fucking thing you could do. Like, in more recent times, in the last, 25 years, the biggest one was when Stone Cold Steve Austin walked. And when CM Punk walked, they both left. And it was like, dude, what the fuck? And then they both are like, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. We should
I'll tell you how long.
The building and
I'll tell you how long.
Tried to compromise it.
Sorry, Jose. I apologize for interrupting. I tell you how long Tony's a wrestler for. He's still wrestling now, mate, because he needs the fucking money.
Today, you'll see it at the very end when you watch him go down. You'll see him in the ring.
Yeah, unfortunately, he still has to do. But the guy's not just attending events where he's doing signings; he's still wrestling.
Yep.
So outlets,
like Mark Henry says, yeah, you can't do that to the fans. And to go ahead and, I know you're going to go ahead and cover it, but let's just cut it like it is. Tony got fired.
He got fired. Vince made an example out of him. Would Vince make an? I'll be honest with you. There are people, I think, at times where Vince could have made an example out of, but didn't. Like HBK, for instance.
Oh yeah.
didn't make an example out of him. You know, even Hulk Hogan, you know, didn't make an example out of him. Was happy to roll out the red carpet for that motherfucker when he came back, considering all the drug scandals and shit like that. So I think there's definitely a race issue. Like make an example out of him was definitely there's a connotation of racism there as well. But that's no surprise from someone like Vince McMahon.
Yeah, that's not shocking at all, because it's like if you were going to talk about making an example out of, like, hell, even Steve Austin, a guy that is a known woman beater, should have never been welcomed back into the WWE, but because money rules the fucking world, Stone Cold came back. I mean,
exactly.
you know, it's some crazy shit.
So Alex would then work for a smaller territory, and he was making less money, 50 to 70 grand a year, which is still at that time pretty good. You know, you can't complain. You know, but the territory he was working for went out of business because they were competing with the WWE, and they couldn't compete with him.
Mm-mm.
And before you know it, Atlas was now out of work, and he ended up being homeless. And he showed you the park bench that he would sleep on.
But
You
this
know,
is
and
but
yeah.
this is also the petty side of Vince McMahon, because this is how ruthless the motherfucker was. He would book a show the day before, knowing it would sell out in that territory, and then the territory would try to sell out the next night, and they couldn't fucking do it. So Vince McMahon's pettiness is definitely one episode of the dark side of the final season of what we're fucking hoping for.
Oh no, Gary, you're making some noise. Oh, God, out and in again, mate.
Yeah, Vince's pettiness is definitely a topic they need to cover in Dark Side of the Ring, I think, as an episode.
Okay, let's see if Gary's better now.
Yep.
Nope. Is that any better?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's okay now. Yeah, it's okay. All right. So before you know it, he was homeless, and he showed you the park bench that he's living on, and he's eating out of a dumpster. But what made it even worse for Tony was that he was not only poor and homeless, but he was famous, poor and homeless, and he wanted him to drive him suicidal. But then, you know, then luck came along, and a woman called Monica who saved him. And this is probably one of the most amazing things. And I was wondering what happened to this Monica person, because they were talking. He talked about her a lot, but we'll get to that obviously. But she became his wife, and Tony got back on his feet, because this is what it is in life. I think people don't realize what it is in life is that sometimes it's not about needing a hand out; it's needing a hand up. And Tony got that with Monica. He got that hand up. You know, he got helped out, because getting a hand up, in my opinion, is way more important than a hand out, because a hand up is everything. Getting a chance to have a roof over your head, having a hot meal, getting a chance to get back into being a fundamental member of society, which Tony was. You know, he became a bouncer for a little while and stuff like that. You know, he was getting his shit together. He was working out again. And this was all because of Monica. And once he did get back on his feet, Vince just said, you know what? Welcome back, Tony Atlas. Come back to the WWE. But my God, did he fucking do that to punish him? And this is the cruel side of Vince, because you got somebody like Tony Atlas and you're bringing him back, but instead of using him and maybe possibly making him a mid to top card star, they bring him back as this fucking bullshit version of Papa Shango. Sorry, not Papa Shango, Kamala. Yeah, known as Saba Simba.
And even Roddy Piper, and when you have, not to cut you off, and I'm sorry, but when you have Roddy Piper bury the gimmick, you're fucked. Like when Roddy Piper buried him on commentary, that was it. That was the kiss of death.
Well, Go on.
Yeah,
no, Gary, please.
Saba Simba was a racist gimmick. Let's just put it that way. And like, you can't tell me that this is not Vince McMahon's kind of like the bad racial stuff that Vince McMahon kind of found funny occasionally. Like, I mean, like, because I mean, you know that the fact that he signed off on some sketchy shit in his day. Like, I mean, we could go through most of it, but like, you know, the big ones are like, you know, what he had Triple H say to Buddy Booker T and blaming like the whole thing with Roddy Piper painting his face half black and stuff like that. It's like, this was another, nickel in the, Vince McMahon's a racist black kid, you know, thing. And it's just like,
yeah, I agree. Look, I mean, The Rock aside, because he was mixed race, but it took until WrestleMania 34 until we had a full black wrestler to win the the WWE Championship, and you saw how they treated him afterwards. You know, they squashed him, and they never made Kofi Kingston to be a credible top tier guy ever again. You know what I mean? Even though the former WWE champion, regardless, you know what they did was they Lord Tenside fucking
Essentially, yes. Yep.
Yeah, because everyone knew who he was. Yeah, and and yet he had to pretend to be this other guy. Now, as far as Tony's concerned, though, he was okay with this because he got it got him back into work. You know, he got a job, and that's all he cared about. You know.
Yeah, he was like, I would have dressed up as a pink gorilla if Vince would have let me. I did not give a fuck. I needed the money.
But
you can see it in Tony.
Yeah, but this shit never gets you over in the long run. Yeah, there's like only a couple of people I can think of who evolved from their gimmick to have a decent career. One of them obviously is Triple H because he was never going to play that blue blood character for the rest of his career. But it's still there's always arguments saying that it was the fact that he had his involvement within the WWE. Plus, he was part of the clique as well and stuff like that. But and even the Undertaker to a degree, like his gimmick evolved. When he became, So yeah, Tony reminds me of Ahmed Johnson. I would say that's an insult to Tony, dude. To tell you the truth,
Tony's a lot better wrestler than Ahmed Johnson.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Ahmed Johnson, dude, that's a Dark Side episode waiting to happen. If they do, that one I can't wait to cover if they do it.
He's an absolute idiot. Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, so considering Tony was homeless, he was very happy just to get some work, but he was never truly going to reach the top again. He never, and the thing is, when you have gimmicks like this, you never stay in the industry for too long either because you're kind of in and out. You think about the wrestlers within the WWE, it's a conveyor belt. There's so many characters who just in and out, never staying for long. Rehash possibly. But
Charles Wright of The Godfather is probably the first guy that comes to mind because that guy's had so many gimmicks. And
I would say Glenn Jacobs as well.
Kane, Glenn Jacobs is Kane,
and Isaac Yankem and the fake Diesel and all of this shit. And what's his face? Is it Smash from Demolition?
Demolition. Yep.
Yeah. He was the Repo Man and all of this, and Crush as well. So like but you look at the WWE as a whole, like they go through wrestlers like nobody's business. They Bastion Booger and all that. They come and they go. Like there's so many of them. Duke the Dumpster and all these fuckers. Like Tony became one of these guys, unfortunately. Anyways, but he did have a chance to reach the top again for just a brief moment. Even though, I forgot to mention he did also wrestle for WCW very briefly. Yep. But he reached the top at one particular moment when he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, rightfully so, in 2006, and you can still see the ring on his finger.
Yep.
Yeah, Chris Jericho is definitely not part of that list, dude. Chris Jericho is
Chris Jericho may have had different gimmicks, but Chris Jericho's always adapted.
And Chris Jericho isn't like a job type gimmick. Like so many of the gimmicks were like your job, like Skinner. I kill fucking alligators for like American Crocodile Dundee. He was, or Duke the Dumpster was a garbage man. Like some of these gimmicks,
Mountie.
Yeah, the Mountie and all of this. Yeah, who was Jack Rougeau, who was part of the Rougeau brothers, and and all of that. So like, but this. Chris Jericho was a different gravy, and he came during the Attitude Era as well. He wasn't part of that 80s era fucking stupid gimmicks, which honestly I really put towards Vince McMahon because wrestlers could just be themselves and not need a gimmick, but Vince McMahon had to do all that gimmick shit. I really fucking hate that guy, I really do. Regardless, once he got inducted to the Hall of Fame, Mark insisted on Tony to be his manager, which was great for Tony because he now got some work, which is fantastic. Yep. And so Tony became his manager, and then I forgot they even tagged with him a little bit.
They tag team together. It was a tag team match player, and
I think he might have been Tony's manager. I think Tony might have been his manager during the whole Hall of Pain thing.
No, it was before. It was pre Hall of Pain because I can remember it was
after Nation of Domination and all of that shit. Yeah, 2006 onwards.
It was when Vince bought ECW, and then he fucking made it into what he wanted it to be, and then ECW was like that developmental fucking brand, and they had Mark Henry as the world champion, and he beat the shit out of like Tommy Dreamer, and yeah, it only lasted like
He
maybe
likes
a
to
year.
bury shit, man. Vince McMahon
Yeah,
doesn't like to pay homage to shit. He likes to bury shit.
very shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You know, bury shit that was in competition with him. You know, he would pay homage to shit like Hulk Hogan till the cows come home. But anyway,
but the one good thing is at least Mark Henry got to get his ass in shape hanging out with Tony Atlas and having him as his manager. So that was the best
yeah.
thing to happen to Mark Henry.
And I thought Tony Atlas was a great manager, man. You know, like this
Yeah.
He
is
was.
a good way to use him. But before you know it, Vince fired him again. You know, and this time round, who
Just
knows what the
because
really
he could. It was because he could do it.
No, but he done the old like, yeah, we still need you. You know, like very much like a gangster who before he smiles at you before he kills you. Yeah, yeah, you're cool with us, and the next day he gets fired, and that's just typical Vince. And I'm not surprised by it, which is why I hate that motherfucker so much. You know. Anyway, Tony still attends wrestling conventions and does some indies because he still needs the money, which was a real sad sight to see that he still has to do indies. And his life is also spent taking care of his wife Monica, who's now in a care home, which really broke my fucking heart. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, really.
It was a sad ending to the episode, you know, seeing his
Yeah,
wife
because like
like
you've
that.
you're talking about like how this woman had saved him, how like she was scared when he started going back on the road again that he would leave her and stuff like that. He says, and he apparently like he spent what little money he had on the rings and stuff like that. It was really like cute story. It's like, where is she? Like, you know, I thought like for a moment she passed away, and then you see him like going to this hospice and like he said that she had a stroke back in 2019. I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
god.
you can see it. You can see it in their face. It was a really sad. You know, what had happened to her, and I give credit to Tony for taking care of her. You know, like he needs to. They've got no kids or anything like that. You know, they're just there for each other.
And the thing is now, you know, as sad as Tony's life is, maybe from a financial perspective, at least he's still got his wife, you know, and he's like, you know, I don't need all the money in the world. I've got my wife. I'm happy. And, you know, it's a bittersweet ending to the episode.
This is where like there needs to be some sort of union or something like that for wrestlers because he's at a period in the stage in his life now where he won't be able to fucking do the wrestling he's doing still. He might be able to sign for stuff, but one day he's gonna take a bad bump. But he shouldn't be doing it anyway. He's in his 70s.
Yeah,
he
he's
shouldn't
70.
be doing. So he shouldn't be doing that shit. And this is where they need to take care of people like Tony. He's a fucking legend.
Yep.
Anyway, let's wrap things up. Tony's life should be remembered as a trailblazer, a good man who was taken advantage of. His humbleness and kindness is still with him, even though he keeps training and take care of his lovely wife Monica. This was a really good episode of a good man who unfortunately had to go through some trials and tribulations during the course of his life.
And before we rank them, just to remind everybody, next week's episode is going to be Superstar Billy Graham. That is my most anticipated episode of this entire season. Cannot wait to see it.
Mine is still Muhammad Hassan personally, but anyway, I look forward to Billy Graham for sure. So let's mark it. I'm going to give this episode an 8 out of 10. Actually, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I got more out of this episode than I expected. It was a very good episode. D. Jose.
Yeah. This is easily getting a 9 out of 10. I thought that this was one of the best episodes that I think they've ever done as a whole. It definitely ranks up there with like Montreal Screwjob, Chris Benoit, Owen Hart, you know, some of the real heavy stuff. I thought that this was a really good episode.
Finally, you guys.
I'll give it a 9 as well. Like, this is one of the stronger episodes of this particular season. I think it was this and Love It Boys that were the two highlights for me so far. But yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, and I really hope the Wrestling Society takes care of this man. He deserves it. He really does. He really does deserve. I don't want to know about him being homeless again because some people are always just one paycheck away from having a bad day. And I don't want that to happen to this guy. He's paid his dues. He's a pinnacle in this industry, and he deserves to be taken care of for the rest of his fucking life. That's what we do with our elderly. We take care of them. Yep. All right. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to NerdTube, the greatest social media channel you never heard of.